It's 7 o'clock, and just once again, I want to say welcome to SDS Thursday with me, Julia Budnik.
And with me, Paul Grantham.
It's the first Thursday in this academic year. Today is the 5th of September, and we have a very, very special treat for you because we are hosting today an international star, an internationally acclaimed actor and writer and audiobook narrator and comedian, Alison Larkin, all the way from America today. Hi, Alison.
Hello everybody.
Whereabout in the States are you, Alison?
I'm living in voluntary rural exile between Boston and New York in an area called the Berkshires, which is the Berkshire Hills of Western Massachusetts.
Fantastic. But Alison only just returned home from London, and before that she was in Edinburgh performing at Edinburgh Fringe, and then performing several nights in London, her new show with a very unusual name, Grief, a Comedy. And Paul and I are friends with Alison. I will say a little bit more about it in a moment, but we both were very privileged to see Alison to perform this show for the first time in London on the first night. And the show moved us so much that to be honest, I was very surprised to see when Paul was the first to get up and to start the standing ovation. He usually is a very reserved Englishman and he doesn't really do these sort of things. But this time he got up and was leading the standing ovation because it was just so unusual and so moving, the show. So we will be talking about it and about Alison's approach to grief, because of course her show is completely autobiographical. It's based on her own story. I'll just say a few words about how we know Alison. Alison is an audiobook narrator and multiple award-winning audiobook narrator. And how many books you've recorded, Alison?
I think about 295.
I thought you were approaching 300.
Yeah.
And Alison has recorded an award-winning full set of Jane Austen's novels. And because I'm a big lover of Jane Austen, I was attending Jane Austen Regency Week in Alton and Chawton, Jane Austen's place where she lived. And Alison was there as well. And that's how we met. So we met through Jane Austen, and one evening we were sitting in the restaurant talking about various things, and I admitted that I was writing a children's book about a mole called Molly, and how I was struggling with the imposter syndrome and wasn't feeling that I was up for it and good enough for it. And it was Alison who took a napkin and wrote on it, "Just do it." And she said, "Julia, if the book is any good, I will narrate it." And thank God it was relatively good, because Alison agreed to narrate it when it was done. So Alison is not only a good friend, but a work colleague for me, because she narrated my book. But today we'll be talking about Alison's life story and various challenges she met in her life. And probably it would be good to start with the latest show, Grief, a Comedy, and how did it come about, Alison? I will share in a minute the link to Alison's webpage, and I know I was talking so excitedly, I've forgotten to ask you to write in the chat box who you are and where you're joining us from, because Alison particularly asks us, where are these people from? And we say we're different every time, because Alison is going on a UK worldwide tour very soon. So maybe she's coming into your area. So if you can tell us, where are you from and why you're joining us tonight? Is the topic of interest, or it was just curiosity? And also, have you been to SDS Thursday before? We are always interested in that question. So where are you from? What is your area of expertise? Why are you joining us? Have you been to SDS Thursday before? I can see already quite a wide geography. So Alison, tell us a little bit about Grief, a Comedy. Strange name, how did it come about?
Well, I think, first of all, hello, it's fantastic to see so many people here. And I think Julia came up with this title, Healing Through Humour, and it was sort of brilliant. And now I know who you are. I think perhaps the most useful thing would be for me just to give a little bit of background about how I came to where I am today. And what happened was I was adopted as a baby and from America and raised in a very traditional, very English family. We lived in England and Africa. And when I was in my teens and early 20s, while my friends were dating and getting married to men who looked like David Beckham, I found myself on red alert when I was in my mid-20s, whenever I was dating a guy, waiting for the object of my affections to leave me, usually by going off with the waitress if I so much as went to the loo. And I knew it was illogical because no one ever did leave me. And I began to wonder if it had something to do with the fact that I was adopted. And maybe if I found out that it wasn't so much that my birth mother didn't want to keep me, but that she simply couldn't, well, maybe that would free me up to live and love like normal people. So the impetus to find my birth mother came from a place of anxiety and real fear whenever I fell in love. And I wanted to find out if it had anything to do with being adopted. I did meet my birth mother, who came from Tennessee and was the diametrical opposite of my English adoptive mother, who sounds pretty much like I do. It was a complex reunion. And as a result of it, I moved to New York and became a stand-up comic. I had been an actress and a writer prior to that. And I didn't really have anybody else to talk to. So I would talk to comedy club audiences about what had just happened. And I figured with comedy, you can say anything you want as long as you can figure out a way to make it funny. So I would say things like, I think everyone should be adopted because that way you can meet your birth parents when you're old enough to cope with them. And the key to dealing with a fear of abandonment is to date people you don't like. So if they do leave you, it doesn't matter. So I was turning what was actually quite painful into really funny jokes. And as any comedian will tell you, only the truth is funny. And if it hurts, you know, you're onto something. So I would, I would explore the whole thing, the culture difference. I'd say things like, when I'm English, I apologize for things I didn't do, but when I'm an American, I blame it all on you. So the stand-up act then evolved into a one-woman show in which I played myself, a comedic version of my English mother and my American birth mother. And I told the story of being adopted into a very traditional family, having a lot of love in the family, but being very different from my adoptive family, and then finding my American birth parents. And that show, I felt very motivated to write it because I wanted people to understand why someone from a very happy adoptive family might need to find the truth about the people she came from. And I knew that adoption was a taboo subject. Nobody was talking about it. Adoptees were not supposed to talk about being adopted. They were not supposed to find their birth parents, and they were certainly not supposed to stand up on a stage and tell audiences about it. And I did. And I found that through the comedy, I was able to reach a lot of people. So fellow adoptees, birth mothers, adoptive parents were coming to the show. And because I'd found a way to write about this in an accessible way, they were talking to each other. One woman had never talked to her father about the fact that she would like to know her birth mother. Because they came to the show, they talked about it. And it just opened up the subject, and it was a hit. It went to the Soho Theatre in London, and then I went to Hollywood, and they were developing a sitcom for me to star in. And then I had children, and I thought, I'm not going to raise them in Hollywood, because the LA philosophy, I may not be much, but I'm all I ever think about. And I thought, there's no way, never having had genetic relatives, that I'm going to bring children into the Los Angeles world. So I quit comedy, moved to New Jersey. I was married by this time, and turned my show into a novel, which became a bestseller in the United States, that's called The English American. And that novel helped change some laws in America. I don't know what the laws are like in England. I know they're better in Scotland now. But at that time, we're talking about, the mid 2000s, when I was writing the novel, came out in 2008. It was actually illegal for most adopted people to have access to their original birth certificates in the United States. And because I'd found a way to write about it lightly, through humor, with short chapters, with an accessible, what's going to happen next kind of quality, people on a beach and a plane and in a Senate, i.e. people who were making adoption laws, had the attention span to go, oh, well, maybe, maybe this is not such a threat to everybody. Maybe this adopted person just needs to know who she is. Maybe this is about personal and cultural identity. And it helped change some laws in some of the states, which was great. So I already knew that comedy could affect change. And then I had these children, and then I wrote the book. And then my husband, who is now my wasband, which I think is a really good word for an ex-husband. I mean, the word ex-husband, it's got sort of axe-like quality to it. I think wasband is better. So my wasband, my wasband, lost all my money, everything. I'd made a lot in Hollywood, which was great because we were very unhappily married. We slept in separate bedrooms. And I thought, well, I have to leave him now, because I really did have to, because he was terrible with money and it wasn't safe for kids. So when my children were 7 and 9, I moved to where I am now in New England. And I quit writing and I quit comedy because I had to support them. And I started my own audiobook company, which is called Alison Larkin Presents. And I started narrating the English classics. And I noticed Elizabeth has Darcy, Jane Eyre has Rochester, but what about me? And my kids grew up, I supported them well, and I realized in my early 50s that I had never been in love, that I had avoided it, that I had deliberately married a man I wasn't passionately in love with, because then I could concentrate on my work and all that, stuff that happened wouldn't be there. So I went down to the coffee shop one day, and there was this older couple there, and they were really, really happy. And 6 months later, I found out that he had died. So I plucked up the courage to say to the woman, I've avoided love my whole life because I didn't want to suffer the way you are now. Was it really worth it? And she said, oh, yes. Was your choice to avoid love really worth it? And for the first time in my life, I asked myself that question. And my kids were now in college, and I realized that I would never find out what it was like to be compatibly and fully in love if I didn't do something about it. So I tried some online dating, which was comical. And then I met Bhima. I walked into the Red Lion Inn one day, which is an inn down the road from me. And I was trying to get a New York Times crossword. because I like to do the crossword on Sundays because it's so much easier than Saturdays. And the last paper had gone, and there was this man from India looking over at me, smiling, saying, "I'm really sorry I took the last paper." And he had come to America 30 years before as well. And we started talking and we clicked. And then he invited me to go on a walk, and we realized we had an enormous amount in common. And in my 50s, for the very first time in my life, I fell in love completely. I think perhaps because I had had children, I knew what love was. And he was a very trustworthy fellow. And it was like wearing a shoe that's too tight for your entire life and then finally taking it off. And there we both were in our 50s, fully in love for the first time in our lives with someone who actually understood us. And we were very, very happy together for 1.5 years. And then he died. And that was in, let me see, that was end of July 2020. And it was the pandemic. So, of course, the funeral had to happen on Zoom. No one came to the house. And it was just me, the dog, the cat, and Bhima. Now, I didn't actually see Bhima, but I grieved him very deeply. I remembered him. I lay on the sofa remembering what had happened. And there was this extraordinary love that was still there, because he died very, very suddenly after a perfect day in which we had made love and looked up at the stars, and suddenly, boom, the next day he was gone. And I was waiting for the despair. At first I was numb, which I believe, I mean, you probably will know a lot more than I do about this, but, you know, I went numb, and the numbness allowed me to function. But when the numbness began to thaw, I was waiting for the despair. And instead I imagined Bhima saying to me, "Get in the best physical shape of your life." We had both been very active, and I started walking and exercising and walking through the hills and past the rivers and lakes where he and I had walked. And whenever I felt tired, I heard him say, "Keep going, Alison." And so when the numbness really went, I was waiting for the despair. And instead of despair, I found there was something else that I had not expected. And it was an kind of joy and a deep, an extra energy. And I didn't understand it. And the only thing that was even remotely like it in my experience is what happens after childbirth, which, as many of the women here will know, is the most excruciatingly painful thing in the world. But without the pain, no kids. Now, I knew Archbishop Desmond Tutu because 15 years before, a friend of mine was making a documentary about him, and she invited me to meet him in New York. And Tutu and I got on very well because he found out that I could do Margaret Thatcher. So he invited me to join his party for 2 days, and I would sit opposite him and we would have political conversations, with me as Margaret Thatcher and him as Desmond Tutu, which of course he was. And we just had the same sense of humor, and we clicked. And at one point he had said to me, "Alison, I want you to remember something. I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I have to tell you this." And he said, "Remember, Alison, I can't control what happens to me, but I can control how I respond to it." So flip forward 15 years, Bhima has died. I have experienced something, I don't even know what it is, really. I did have, by the way, a grief counselor who I spoke to by Zoom, which was a lifesaver, once a week. And I think it was some kind of, I don't know what it was, this energy, and it's kind of still there, but it was there. And so our mutual friend, I kept thinking of what Tutu had said to me. I can't control what happens to me, but I can control how I respond to it. And I listened to a wonderful audiobook called The Book of Joy by Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. And when I was, I was on my own, very, isolated, but I put that on all night long. So when I woke up, as I invariably did, I would hear either Tutu or the Dalai Lama talking about finding joy in the midst of acute suffering. And it was just fascinated me, and it was the closest I could come to what was going on. So our mutual friend said, why don't you write to Archbishop Desmond Tutu and tell him what's happened? So I did. I sent him, this was in 2020. This was probably October-ish, November-ish, 2020. And I wrote to Tutu and I said, I avoided love my whole life because I was so afraid of the worst happening. And then I found it. But then instead of wanting to hide under the bed and never come out again, I'm finding that I want to live and love more fully than ever. What is that? And he wrote back to me and he said, he had known my work. He knew my first show about finding my birth mother. He said, you know how to take the impossible and turn it, using humor, tell the truth through humor. You must return to comedy and writing, and you must tell this story because it will bring hope to people who might otherwise condemn themselves to a life of despair. And I said, well, I don't think I can actually bear to write another book. And he said, so tell jokes, sing songs, whatever, but tell it. Well, you can't ignore Archbishop Desmond Tutu. I mean, and so Bhima had been trying to get me to write again. And up until then, I had felt kind of paralyzed, but I started to think, well, what do I want to say? Because so much work to write a show. What do I really want to say? And the first thing that came to mind was what I really wanted to say came out as a kind of song. And it was, don't waste your time on anything that doesn't matter. Because I now knew it could be gone just like that. Each day you get to choose how you will spend it. Don't waste a minute because tonight might end it. That's what I wanted to say. I thought that's the thing I most urgently want to say to people. So I called Gary Schreiner, who's an Emmy award-winning composer and a very good friend of mine. And I said, will you help me write some songs? And I went to New York. And at first I was just bawling. He'd say, you ready for the next chord? And I go, just hang on a second. And I'd cry. And then out would come another line. And then another song would come in to describe life before Bhima. I wrote a song which went, if you're afraid of love, avoid it. If you really like somebody, stay away from any man you find attractive. You can still have a life that's active. Write a book, write a speech, write a play. So out came the story in 6 songs. And then I wrote the story of Bhima and me, which was a wonderful love story. And that sort of, then suddenly the Soho Theatre in London, who had done my last show, said, we'd love to put it up. And then at first they were just doing one show, which Julia and Paul came to. And suddenly I was on Woman's Hour on BBC. And I think you've got a link to that in your thing, Julia, is that right? And suddenly they were saying, we want to take it to the Edinburgh Fringe. And suddenly there's a London run. And now we are going all over the UK. And what has astonished me is that people are coming to the show. The reviewers, there have been amazing reviews, and they're saying that even the Daily Mail, of all things, said this is a show which has you believing that joy really can be found after grief. And then others are saying that it is actually changing people's lives. And I'm going, well, good, because Tutu pushed me into this. And he's obviously a religious guy. So he had so I did write it and it worked. And of course, Tutu has since died. But then after that, I decided I wanted to explore it more. So I started writing a book, and the book starts about 3 months after Bhima died, when Bhima showed up at my kitchen table, the one I'm sitting at now, determined to help me find love again. It's imaginary, of course, or is it? And I was playing with just exploring it. So that book is now only available immediately after live shows, but you can go to my website and sign up for it if you want to know when it comes out. And we just had a big publisher say they want to publish it next year. So it's very exciting. And so I don't know, I'm not an expert. You are all experts. I don't know anything about, I'm not a counselor, I'm not trained. All I know is how to tell a truth in an accessible way through humor. What's been happening after shows is people who have lost loved ones are coming, and then they're bringing their friends, and then they're coming again, and they're telling me that they feel so much better after seeing the show than they did when they came in. And then we're getting young people coming who are interested in love, and some of them are saying, oh, wait, I've been avoiding love. I've been doing exactly the same thing, and now I'm not going to do it. And I'm going, yes, yes, yes. So whatever it is, I mean, I'm doing it because I want it to help people. It's working. We're selling out wherever we go. And then it's going to go to either off or on Broadway next year. We're not sure where. So that's sort of what's happened. And one of the things that I kind of wanted to ask you all, I think it's important to let people who are grieving know about the show, that it's not something to be afraid of, that they will feel better afterwards. And people are getting together in the bar after shows, and they're talking with each other about all sorts of things. The things that nobody dares talk about, like the relationship that continues after somebody's died with somebody who you love very, very much. And people are talking. And I said to one woman, did you feel a sense of your husband? And she said, oh, absolutely. She said, yeah, actually, I lay the table for Wilf every night. And he's been dead 4 years. And we sit there and have a right old chat. And because she said it, so did someone else. And then people were able to realize that they're less alone. The reason I'm doing it live is because I think we've all been behind screens for a very, very long time since COVID. We need to meet in person. We need connection. And I'm finding it's wonderful for me to be meeting people who've had a similar experience, and also people who are just there for comedy, and also women who think that it's too late at 50 to find love. Well, it certainly is not. And so that's sort of what I'm doing. And I didn't, when Julia suggested I did this, I was very excited, because I'm not a therapist, obviously, and I'm not a counselor, and I'm not qualified to advise anybody. But I know I've got something that's helping people, and I want to let as many people know as possible about it. And the other quick thing to say is that I don't know if any of you know of Cruise UK, which offers free one-on-one bereavement counselling. But what we're doing is we're putting in all the programs, information about that, so that people who need help, who've come to the show and maybe need help, have somewhere to go. So there we go.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alison. I've just put in the chat box the link to Alison's website, which has all the dates for the show. And I've also copied the dates and venues for the show around the UK. So you can have a look if Alison is somewhere in your area. I already saw Cambridge, and she is going to be in Cambridge in the beginning of 2025. I wanted to bring in Paul, if you don't mind, because Paul, when you went to this show, you didn't really know what to expect. You knew Alison, you knew of the story, but I think you went mainly to oblige me, to make me happy. But tell us a little bit about from your professional also point of view as a clinical psychologist. How did you feel? What did you think after the show?
Well, gosh, where to start with it? I thought it was inspirational. I think probably my strongest thoughts about it were that this was a very fresh, very positive approach to the issue of loss. I think that, you know, the way Alison has described the situation now, and also what I found from the show, was that in many ways there are actually two interlinked issues, which in many ways link the adoption question that she's mentioned earlier today, also with the issue of loss. And I think they both center on questions of personal identity and also of meaning. And I think one of the biggest challenges, I think, for anyone that's experienced a major loss is that it feels very much like, in a sense, it's what Alison said. You've got this non-negotiable event. It is what it is, what it is. It's not pleasant, and there appears to be no way of having a different relationship with that event. In that respect, the event very easily can feel like a prison. And I think and it also obviously raises questions as to who am I in connection with this when this loss has actually occurred. And one of the things I think that struck me when I saw the performance and why I found it so powerful and so useful is, again, in a sense, what Alison's just said, that you can't change events, but you can change your relationship with events, and you can change how you respond to events. But the problem is it's not easy to do that because the nature of them feels like everything's predetermined. So what that tends to mean is that in order to do this, one's got to find another perspective. You've almost got to look at the event from a different angle. And I think the unique thing that comedy offers in this context, as it does with so many issues, when you think about the many different issues that are often quite difficult or quite painful, but which comedy and humor have interweaved with, I think actually comedy provides an alternative perspective which enables us to reframe what those particular events are actually about, both in terms of the meaning, and I think Alison, you know, is very brave, to be honest with you, to talk about joy in connection with loss. You know, it at first sight seems like a very weird idea, but I think that that comedy and humor is one of the few ways in which you can do that. And I think that in that particular respect, it is something which, to be honest with you, I genuinely don't think is used enough within the psychotherapy field. So often we're trying to grapple with helping people to have a different perspective, to reframe things that have actually occurred. But there's not a lot that's actually being written about this or practiced about it. I guess some of you will at least be familiar with the concept of laughter therapy, which is one particular sort of aspect of this that has sometimes been used. But I think there is something of a tendency to always view loss in a rather linear way. And I think actually what is often required is a totally different perspective, one that's sometimes, to be honest with you, rather left field and which one wouldn't expect. And I think that the great thing about certainly the show that I saw with Alison was it just provides an absolutely unique way of reframing and rethinking, and also having a different experience as well in connection with loss. And I think that that's enormously valuable. And I'm very, very encouraged, because I obviously didn't know this at the time when we saw you originally, Alison, but I'm really encouraged to hear it prompted so much discussion between people and enabled them to talk about the value that would actually have in terms of the way they're related to their own loss. So I think that what you're actually offering here is quite invaluable. Yeah.
I think that the other thing that really surprised me was the young people that were coming. And about, and the perspective on love. And it is, yeah, and it's fascinating to me too, because of course I've been living in this house for 4 years, and now I'm out and I get to talk to people like you and hear a perspective like yours just now, which is very interesting. And I just don't know, what you guys feel, but from my point of view as a non-expert, non-trained professional, I think that we need to connect with each other and talk with each other and realize that we are not alone, and that people all over the world are losing loved ones. And I also found that, just really realizing that, we get this Tutu line, when actually it was Viktor Frankl who said it, really. I mean, a lot of people have said it. I can't control what happens to me, but I can control how I respond to it. Is that if we believe we can, then we can, and that we give ourselves permission when we're in the depths of suffering and grief to look at the sunshine, or to play with the dog, or to do something we love. That this is all new to me, but it's that's all.
Sorry, I was going to say, can I just throw one additional thing in there, because it's another key thing, I think, both in what you've just said now and also the performance. The tendency for so many of us to engage in some form of avoidance when we are having this sort of experience. And I think first thing to say is the very unusual title and nature of your performance is the exact opposite of avoidance. But humor in so many other contexts, and that enables us to approach things where our natural inclination is to avoid. And I think that's one of its other great strengths. It facilitates approach to what are obviously very painful things.
Yeah, I think it's true. I don't know who was it. Maybe Oscar Wilde. Somebody said, if you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh first, or they'll kill you.
Yeah.
and yeah. I mean, if you think about it, it's the same muscles, isn't it? The same muscles that you laugh with or you cry with. And it's like the line at the end of my show that if grieving is the price we pay for the deep love that we feel, then grief is just part of the deal. That it's the other side of deep love. And that's something that that is new. And it's nice of you to say that I'm brave, but I'm not sure that I am. I think I was just designed this way, and I don't care what people think. I just don't. And also, what's the worst that could happen? Well, it's already happened. I mean, Bhima died. And so if nobody came to the shows, it doesn't matter. So then you can take risks that aren't really risks anymore, but you just say, how am I going to spend the rest of this time? And in my case, it's a case of, okay, well, I could be dead in a week. So what do I really want to do? And I think that the secret that I didn't realize until fairly recently is that the key to happiness is helping other people, or at least one of them is. That's probably why you all do what you do. I mean, you're doing jobs that matter, and you can help other people, and that brings out a connection and a love, and that's what the best of being human's about. And I fear that in a world that's so divided at the moment, with this ridiculous division between political parties and all kinds of things, and everybody's fighting with each other, the thing that strikes me is that we have to find our common humanity. And where is our common humanity? In loss, in love, in finding a way through, in laughter, in coming together. And so for me, I think it's helping me. I think by doing something that is bringing people together and helping other people, it's actually helping me. And it would be much, much braver of me to try and clean your kitchen. That I can't do.
It's not too bad, Alison.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm actually thinking of my skills in your kitchen would not be appreciated.
I wanted to jump on one thing you've said about permission. I think the show and the permission to laugh about some of the things, to try to find new joy in your life, to try to find new love potentially in your life. I think very often, and depending on the cultural background as well, sometimes you almost need that external permission or need a prompt, somebody pushing you, saying you are allowed to live again. Because I mean, I know, for example, in British culture, humor plays enormous role, you know, and people even they make speeches at the funeral and sometimes humor is there. In many other cultures, it's definitely not acceptable. You just have to grieve, grieve, and grieve. And I thought that was really, really important thing to give people permission to see it from a slightly different perspective, to allow yourself to live. I just read a story, interestingly, talking of humor, I read a story about a mother who was looking after a child with cancer. And she was really at the end of her, you know, tether, is it the word tether?
Yes.
Yeah. And she felt, I can't go to that hospital full of children with cancer anymore. I just can't do it. And what she did, she started dressing up as a clown. And she went to that hospital dressed as a clown. And that's how she managed to overcome that obstacle which she had inside her, because she couldn't do it anymore. So I just thought it was interesting. I read this article today and I thought, gosh, it goes very well with topic of healing through humor and, you know, grief, a comedy. So it is, in my opinion, I don't know what you think, Alison and Paul, in terms of that permission about having this discussion helps people to know that they're allowed to carry on. What do you think?
Well, sorry, do you want to go first, Alison?
No, you go first. You go first.
I think ritual is a two-edged sword. I think that when you are confronted by something which disturbs identity and disturbs meaning so much, we desperately need a framework in terms of knowing how to respond. And I think ritual or prescribed ways of responding, or you know, what might be described, if we take the issue of grief as a natural process to go through with grief, that provides that structure. But the problem is that such structures can also be a prison. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I think for anyone to come through a major event, they will have to have a different way of relating to that event. I think that in a sense, the issue of having permission to not necessarily approach things in a prescribed way, and I think the example of Humour is an excellent illustration of that, is something which I think plays potentially an enormous role. And I have to say it again, I just think that this needs to be explored therapeutically much more, not enough is done. So yeah, I think that question of permission, and not necessarily having to go through things in a prescribed manner, is really, really important. Yeah.
I actually have a moment in the show where of course I'm exaggerating for comedic effect, but I talk about a week after Bhima died. Everybody in our community, of course, knew what had happened because it was in the newspapers. And I went down to the post office, and a masked woman comes up to me and says, it's going to take a long, 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 long time. And there are a lot more than just 5 stages of grief. Aftershock and denial, there'll be pain and guilt, sadness, anger, desperation, bargaining with God. I'll become a nicer person if you can just bring him back, kind of thing. Loneliness, depression, despair, and suicidal thoughts. It's going to be really, 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 really hard. And I put it in because I sure, for her, that was right. But there is no, these 5 stages of grief. You've been, first of all, feel this, and then you've been, I mean, everybody grieves differently. And for somebody to tell you, oh, it's going to be really, really hard. Well, yeah, of course it was hard, but it's not necessarily going to go in that linear way. And there are no rules, and there are no books. And that, isn't it all about, isn't therapy, I mean, I don't know, but isn't therapy about authentic? It's about finding out who you are authentically. So you don't need anybody's permission to do anything except your own. And that, isn't it about freeing us up to be who we are? And then, so that's sort of, I think that's a really interesting point. And my heart breaks for people who think they need permission to do anything, really. And that's where you guys come in, by helping them realize they don't, which is really important work.
If you have any questions for Alison or comments, and want to, rather than write it, say it, please put your hand up, ideally electronic hand, and Polina will be watching the screen very carefully, and we'll unmute you, and you can, or actually maybe Polina, we can let people chance to unmute yourself and just go ahead without putting hands up. Let's go, just unmute yourself and go for it, if you have any questions or comments. People like to write. Yes, please, Kim, go for it.
That was very interesting, Alison. Thank you very much, and a different perspective. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes. I think I've lost your. Oh no, there you are again. Okay, got you. Yeah.
Yeah, the different perspective. And while you were talking, I was thinking about other sorts of loss as well, not just death, and how applicable it is for many losses that we experience, and how serious that can be sometimes, and we lose something around laughter, even when it's quite an innate part of us. You know, if we like to have fun, it seems to be stripped away, and it's quite hard to for some reason you were able to access it quite easily.
Access what? I'm sorry.
The joy and
joy. Well, no, not easily, and not immediately. It was after numbness, numbness. It was after the numb period.
Yeah.
But then I did. But you know what I think? I mean, again, I'm not a psychologist, but Bhima and I were so in love with each other. And we just 5 days earlier decided to get married. And so when he died, suddenly his body wasn't there, but the love was still there. So I think when the numbness left, I think that's partly what I felt. But the other way that I was able to access it was, he was such an exercise nut. He would insist that I exercise. So when he died, then I thought, okay, get in the best physical shape of your life. And what can I control? I'm going, well, I can control what I eat. If I have sugar, I knew I had to stay away from sugar and coffee, because I thought I'm going to go up and down, and I'm way too vulnerable for that. So I'm going to go nuclear on what I put in my body, really healthy food, tons of water, exercise. So I think the numbness went, and I accessed the joy once I had taken care of my body, the things I could control.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Does it?
Yes, it does. Yes, it's like a cleansing in a way.
So what's that?
It's almost like a cleansing.
Yes.
I think, let me just throw in something here, because again, I think that Alison's alluded to this periodically, but it's worth sort of bringing it out. There is a tendency to view loss in a purely linear way. You know, we think loss, we think pain. In some way. And actually, I think one of the things that you've highlighted, Alison, which is really quite important, is that a lot of this stuff actually operates as a dialectic. You know, there's pain and there's joy. It's not one or the other necessarily. You know, there's that sense of appreciation of this relationship, whilst also still experiencing the loss of this relationship. And I think that you know, one of the things you really highlighted really well is it doesn't all have to be one thing or the other. Actually, these two things can often go together hand in hand. There's a bittersweet element to it in
That's
some way.
right. But, you know, and also something that you just, I'm sorry, I forgot your name.
Kim.
What is
Yeah.
Kim?
Kim.
What you just said was really
Yes,
interesting
Kim,
because
sorry.
it just made me think of something that I say in the show. And I basically say that I've come to the conclusion that it's actually quite useful to have had early childhood abandonment or loss of some kind, so that when the worst happens again, there's a part of you that goes, I remember that, like a muscle that you haven't used in a really long time, but is familiar when you start using it again. So you reframe early loss, you reframe people who've been abandoned in whatever way, and you go, well, yeah, terrible. And yet that gives you the strength so that when you have a terrible loss later, you know already you're a survivor. And that helped me. That helped me, I think.
Yeah, thank you. Anybody else?
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. People are writing comments in the chat box. I hope you see it, Alison.
Oh, I'd love to, but I'm not very technical.
We'll send you the
But one thing I do know is I know that the Times Radio, I don't know if any of you listen to Times Radio, but I'm on the Alexis Conran show this coming Saturday. They pre-recorded it. And what I'm supposed to be doing today, but I'm not having much better time talking to you, is I had a call after the Times piece, because there was a feature in the Times, which I think you put on your website, the Daily Mail called, and I'm supposed to be writing an article about love as a young woman, then in a marriage which was very lonely, and then finding the real thing later on in life. And where I'm sort of at is, you know, look, if they're asking me to do it, I'm just going to tell the truth, because if I can tell, if it resonates with other people, then there's some so that I don't know when the Daily Mail piece will come out. It's on I think it comes out on a Monday, and it's called the Inspirational something, and it'll be in 2 or 3 or maybe 4 weeks, maybe 2 weeks, I don't know, but
we'll keep an eye on it, Alison, because actually people can follow you on Facebook. I'll send them the link.
And Instagram, and
and I will let people know if new bits are coming out.
Great.
That'll be great. Well, there's lots and lots of thank yous here, and I know you've got another meeting coming up, so we'll be finishing here. I hope you will all look up and see if Alison is coming to your area. And
here are my list. Listen, I'm very excited about this because I haven't been to England in I haven't spent this amount of time in England in over 30 years, and I miss it. I kind of got stuck in America, and now I kind of want to come home. But here, if any of you are in Buxton, Swindon, Southend, Harrogate, Henley, Fareham, Guildford, Leamington Spa, Cambridge, Wimborne, Exeter, Chelmsford, or Leeds, then I'd love to meet you and come see the show and come hang out in the bar afterwards, and we can carry on the conversation.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for coming, everyone. As always, you can unmute yourself and say your goodbyes and thank yous, and we'll see you again very, very soon. And have a good evening. And Alison, have a good day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, all of you. Okay,
Bye.
bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.